So your Super Famicom has arrived from Japan, but can you even plug it into the wall in America? Does it work with our TVs, both old and new? In this video, I'm going to explain how to play the Super Famicom in North America. I'm your man out of Japan, Jay Contra, and I've wanted to make this video for a very long time just so I can clear up some misconceptions about how to play a Super Famicom console and games in the United States specifically, North America in general. Unfortunately, I don't know that much about the PAL region, so somebody in the comments is going to have to correct me when I misspeak, which is inevitable. But let's start with just powering this thing on. So when you first purchase a Super Famicom from Japan, either if you're going to a hard-off or you're buying one off of Surugaya, it will very often come with two sets of cords. The first will be this power brick, which is meant for Japan. It will also come with a set of AV cables, but we'll talk about AV in a second, so let's put those aside. Instead, what we're first going to focus on is the power brick. Now, this power brick is rated for 100 volts, which is the voltage that is standard in houses in Japan. In the United States, however, house voltage is set at 120 volts. There are people online who will say that you can plug in this Japanese power supply into an outlet in North America and be fine. And through anecdotal evidence, that seems to be the case. However, because of the 20 volt difference between Japan and the United States, you may end up over a very long period of time either frying the system, which is, I think, unlikely, or more likely over, say, decades. You could end up frying the power supply. Now, of course, it's an external power supply, so it's not the biggest deal. You can just find a replacement. However, I would suggest that you purchase a North American power supply. Now, not a Super Nintendo power supply, because those will not work with the Super Famicom. Actually, if you look on the back, the plug for the power line is actually a different size between the United States Super Nintendo and the Japanese Super Famicom. However, what I've been using, I think for the last 10 or 15 years, has been the sort of third-party 2-in-1, or sometimes it's marketed as 3-in-1 power supply, because you have the large end here, which is useful for both the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America as well as the Super Nintendo. But what it also has, and this is where you get the extra one out of this power supply, is a plug for the Model 1 Sega Genesis in North America. And this plug fits the Super Famicom, and it also delivers the correct voltage. So you don't need to worry about anything happening to your system in the long run. Another option, which I don't have here on the table, is to use a voltage converter, which will take the 120 volts that's coming out of your wall and turn it to 100 volts to use with this power supply. But that's a bit of overkill. Those can cost anywhere from $50 plus, depending on how big of one you get. I would suggest getting this 2-in-1, 3-in-1 power supply. You can also use just a regular Genesis Model 1 power supply with a Super Famicom. I can only recommend this one because this is the one that I have personally used. Let's move from power to AV. You finally turned on your Super Famicom, but what TV do you plug it into? Is it even going to work with TVs in the United States? Well, actually, yes, because Japan and America share the same old TV standard of NTSC. You can use the standard Super Famicom cables that you probably got as a part of your complete console package. You can use these and plug these straight into a regular CRT. Now, there are the composite cables that are pretty standard with the Super Famicom, and you can also use S-video cables. Now, there are official Nintendo S-video cables. Those tend to be more expensive than third-party cables. I haven't had that big of an issue in the past using third-party S-video cables, but I think that's a more technical topic that I don't think we should cover here. Instead, what I want to talk about is what happens when you want to plug a Super Famicom into a more modern TV. You have to remember that back when they were developing this in the late 1980s, they didn't know that 20 or 30 years later, you weren't going to find composite or sometimes even component inputs on the back of these modern HD TVs. So What are you gonna do? Well, there are some HD TVs that do have composite or component inputs on the back of them, but you're going to run into a lot of issues with, say, with lag in terms of your controller input due to the processing that the TV has to do to convert that analog into a digital signal. And then you're also going to have TVs that you simply can't plug this into. So what are you going to do? Well, I would recommend that you get some kind of upscaler, especially if you have multiple retro consoles that you want to plug into a modern TV. You don't have to go as crazy as I have and get the RetroTink 5X, but will this make the picture look extremely beautiful? You can also go with the RetroTink 2X. There are also multiple other upscalers out there. My personal experience has been with the RetroTink 5X. And this way you can use either the composite cables or the S-video cables with this. And most upscalers that I have seen have at least composite, most have S-video. But if you want the best possible picture out of your Super Famicom, I highly recommend getting the HD Retrovision component cables and combining them with the RetroTink 5X. I've actually been using these over the past couple days since getting them from my order, and these will show you a beautiful, stunning picture that I just did not expect to appreciate the difference. I have been living my life saying that S-video is the way to go, and I suppose if you're plugging it into a regular CRT, that is true, since not many CRTs have component in, but there is a distinct difference, especially when you're using an upscaler and you're looking at something at 1080p. There is a huge difference, an appreciable difference, between S-video cables and component cables. Now, I'm going to bring out a very special console. This might be what you have. This is the Super Famicom Junior. You may know it as like the Super Nintendo Mini. I can't remember what they called it in the United States. What you need to know about this is that you don't need, the power situation is the same between the regular Super Famicom and the Super Famicom Junior. However, the Super Famicom Junior does not output RGB. It does not output via these component cables. You will need to perform or have performed some modification on the Super Famicom Junior to even output S-video or RGB. The Super Famicom, the regular, I guess you could say the standard edition, does not need any modification to output RGB / component or SCART output. The Super Famicom Junior requires modification to output RGB, so keep that in mind. However, the Super Famicom Junior is a great looking console, and I'm glad that I have it. So what about games? Let's talk about playing Super Nintendo and Super Famicom games across the systems. So with the Super Famicom, of course, you can play Super Famicom cartridges. You can technically also play Super Nintendo cartridges. However, they don't fit the slot. You can't even fit the Super Nintendo game into the Super Famicom. They will play, however, if you can find online a pass-through adapter. It's an adapter that you plug in here and then you plug your game into the adapter. You can play, I think, pretty much every Super Nintendo game on the Super Famicom. But what if you want to do the reverse? What if purchasing a Super Famicom is an insane idea that costs too much money and you already have, say, a Super Nintendo? Well, your Super Famicom games will work on the Super Nintendo, but you're going to need a pass-through adapter. If you try, you're like, oh, how exciting, it fits into the slot. No, because of the tabs that are at the bottom of the system, you can see the rear of Chrono Trigger here, and then the rear of the Donkey Kong Country here from North America. This has tabs that will allow it to completely fit into the cartridge slot here that you just don't have with the Japanese Super Famicom games. So while it may look like you can put your games into the system, they will not play. You will need some kind of pass-through adapter to play your Super Famicom games on a Super Nintendo. Lastly, just a small bit about controllers, but Super Famicom and Super Nintendo controllers are region-free. So you can see here, I've got a North American Super Nintendo controller. It plugs in and works with the Super Famicom, no problem, and vice versa. So Super Famicom controllers are a great, cheap alternative to regular Super Nintendo controllers, and those Super Famicom controllers will work with a Super Nintendo. So also keep that in mind. I think I have covered everything. We've talked about power cables, AV cables, what TV you should probably use. In the end, the best possible picture you are going to get out of the system is going to be with, say, like a RetroTink 5X or a FrameMeister or an OSSC using the HD RetroVision cables on a modern TV. However, I personally think that because these systems were designed to go with these ancient CRTs, I personally play all of my Super Famicom and Super Nintendo games on CRT unless I'm capturing something for the YouTube channel. I hope this video has been informative to you. I hope it's cleared up perhaps a few misunderstandings that you'll find out there on the internet. Yes, I know about the power. There has been, I think, a lot of keyboards destroyed talking about the power requirements for Japanese retro consoles in the United States. Yes, a lot of these electronic pieces of equipment do have certain tolerances that are built into them, but if you want to keep your console alive for the longest possible time, I would say that you should do things right. You should get the proper equipment to use your retro consoles in the United States, be they Japanese or American. I've been your man out of Japan, Jay Contra. Thanks for watching, and mahalo.